When my son told me not to come to his wedding, I closed my eyes, breathed in the smell of the old leather chair at my kitchen table, and began rewriting my will. I could have screamed, I could have pleaded. Instead, I put my hand on the stack of envelopes I had filled over the years and made a plan that would restore more than money. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel and tell me where you are watching from, because this one is for anyone who ever felt used and called it love. You will hear receipts, conversations, and a public reckoning. Trust me, you will not expect how it ends. The morning he said it, the light through the blinds looked thinner, like the house was holding its breath. Daniel sat across from me at the small round table I bought with my first promotion check. He had his phone in his hand, the new polished engagement ring on his finger glinting in the sun. He said, "Dad, we are keeping the ceremony small. I think it is best if you do not come." I felt the coffee go cold in my mouth. I asked him to repeat it. He did. I asked him if he was joking. He did not laugh. I looked at the photo of Maria and me on the furnace mantel, my fingers tracing the cloudy glass as if I could wipe away the hurt. My voice came out quieter than I wanted. "Is this about money?" He looked away. "It is complicated." I asked him to explain. He said, "You just do not fit into our plans, Dad." I named each small thing I had paid for, every stain on his childhood furniture that was from my work. He flinched. "We have our own way now," Laura, his fiancée, said from the doorway, arms crossed, perfume sharp in the air. That was the sentence that landed like a hard thing in my chest. You do not fit into our plans. I rose slowly, my legs mindful of the hip that ached and cold, and I left the apartment carrying more than my coat. On the drive home, the radio hummed and the smell of rain mixed with exhaust. I began to count. It started as a whisper in my head and became a ledger. 5 years of automatic transfers to a college fund that had been used for family vacations. 2 loans where I paid the interest because they were saving for a house. A line of credit I had cleared quietly when their business had stumbled. I saw the toothbrush and the cup on Daniel's sink, the dent in the doorframe from when he was small, the birthday balloons we bought. Each memory had a receipt. My hands trembled when I found the checkbook tucked under a drawer and the faded post-it notes with amounts and dates. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote, slowly, a list of sums that added up to a number that made my throat dry. I stalled over my next breath and thought of Maria, her laugh echoing in the hallway, the way she used to fold the napkins for Thanksgiving. I promised her once that I would never be dependent, that I would keep our dignity. I realized dignity had a price, and that I had been paying it for a family that now measured me by inconvenience. My past came in 3 parts, and each part explained why I chose such a deliberate path. As a boy, my childhood was a small room above my father's grocery, the smell of yeast and coffee in the morning, the feel of flour under my nails. We shared a bed until I was 11. I learned that providing meant sacrifice, and that a quiet stability could be more valuable than applause. I left that house with calluses and a determination to make a new life. In my adult years, I worked as a plant supervisor, the hum of machines and the metallic scent of oil forming a kind of music. I saved, I invested, I refused luxuries, knowing each dollar might protect someone else. Maria and I used our savings to fix leaking roofs and to pay for Daniel's first car. We planted a small tree in the backyard and celebrated paychecks with cheap wine. Then came loss. Maria's illness took her light slowly, like a curtain falling. Bills piled at the same time grief arrived. I took on the loans, negotiated with the bank, signed papers at midnight with hands that shook. The loss changed me, resculpted my priorities. My will, originally written in a calm season, became a document I updated between hospital visits, a promise that what remained would honor what we had built, not the entitlement of those who would later accuse me of mismanaging generosity. Those nights, with the hospital ventilator's clicks and the antiseptic smell, taught me that fairness can be enforced if you name it in black and white. I called my lawyer, Mark, the afternoon after the wedding phone call. I smelled his office before I heard him. Coffee and old legal books. Mark, I need to change the will, I said, and he did not flinch. He had counseled us when Maria was alive, a steady presence who had once brought over apple pie and sat quietly while we made plans. What do you want to change? He asked. I explained that I wanted to redistribute assets based on documented contributions and to place a clause that required notice and mediation rather than unconditional gifts. He typed, asked clarifying questions, and suggested protective language. You want to be careful, he said. You want to make it clear why. I told him to include the bank transfers, the receipts, the renovations, the mortgage payments I had made on a rental that had housed Daniel while he started his life. He asked if I wanted to notify anyone. I paused. Not yet, I said, but catalog everything. I want transparency, not a fight that drags the family through gossip. Mark agreed and said he would draft a new document to be notarized that week. The first moment of tension came when I sat in the bank with Javier, the account manager, whose pen scratched against the desk. The room smelled of lemon cleaner, the fluorescent lights humming above us. I placed a folder on the table, the pages stuck from the humidity. These were automatic transfers, I said, tapping the bank statements. He raised an eyebrow and read aloud dates, numbers, tiny lines of automatic withdrawal. Mr. Alvarez, these transfers were authorized by you. I nodded. Yes, I authorized them. I'm requesting a formal record of all communications and an audit of the account history tied to my name. He hesitated, fingers drumming, then said, that will take time and a written request. I slid a printed letter across, my hand steady now. Do it, I said. He sighed. We will need identification, signatures, and an appointment with compliance. My throat tightened, a familiar ache. I thought of Maria's hands when she used to cradle mine and the warmth of her palm. Schedule it today, I demanded. He made the call, the click of his phone a small percussion of progress. The bank agreed to run the history in 2 weeks. I left the branch with the taste of iron in my mouth and the knowledge that records can be weaponized or they can be evidence. At home, I began gathering everything that said I cared. Receipts in shoeboxes, emails with agreed contributions, texts where Daniel thanked me for covering a deposit, a faded prom ticket I had paid for, a contractor's invoice that bore my name. I spoke to neighbors who remembered paint colors and payments. Susan from next door remembered when I had replaced a leaky gutter and told her teenage son to look after my grandson at the cookout. Tom, an old friend who ran a local handyman service, produced pictures on his phone of a porch I had paid to rebuild. Emily, Daniel's sister, sent me screenshots of messages where Daniel promised to have Dad's back. Each piece fit into a pattern. I labeled everything and photocopied documents until my desk looked like a paper fortress. Rachel, a reporter from the local paper, who had covered community stories for years, met me for coffee and said, "If you have paper, you have power." I wanted power not for revenge, but for truth. This is the place where I need you to pause. If you are feeling anger or recognition, you are not alone. Many older adults carry silent ledgers of sacrifice and pain. If you have ever had to say no to a loved one for the sake of your own future, write yes or no in the comments and add one sentence. I had to protect my. Your comment will join a community where people share practical steps and emotional support. Your words help others to know they are not the only ones balancing love and boundaries. Now, back to the story. The next steps required patience, careful timing, and a public moment where silence would no longer be an ally. I called Daniel to warn him I would not attend the ceremony, not because I intended to punish him, but because the day would require presence that had to be honest. The phone call became a scene I narrated slowly to Mark when he visited. "You are doing this on purpose," Daniel accused, in a voice that trembled between anger and guilt. "I'm not doing it on purpose," I replied. "I am making sure outcomes match contributions." "You always make things into transactions," Laura said, cutting in. I inhaled and listed, calmly, the amounts, the dates, The nights I had sat up paying bills, the nights Maria had whispered gratitude. He asked for one more chance. I suggested mediation. He refused. I told him I would not be shamed into invisibility in a house I had helped secure. The exchange had 10 small moves: accusation, clarification, denial, insistence, memory, silence, offer, refusal, boundary, and a final quiet. Each beat had its sound: the click of a bracelet, the rustle of a childhood blanket, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. The dialogue ended with him hanging up and me sitting with my fingertips pressed to the cool wood of the table, feeling the grain like a map of choices. The public provocation came 3 weeks later. A wedding announcement circulated on social media with a photo of Daniel and Laura smiling under strung lights. Comments poured in, congratulating them, assuming all was happy. I received a message from Rachel, the journalist, asking if I would consider sharing my side if there were discrepancies. I declined initially, wanting first to lay out everything with Mark and with the bank. But a small smear piece appeared in the community newsletter, suggesting that I had been distant and absent, implying that I had withheld support out of spite. The words burned like cold. I read them at Susan's kitchen table as she brought over lemon cake, the sugar dust on my tongue a small comfort. The article misrepresented years of quiet support as abandonment. I felt shame spread like a stain. That was the moment I realized silence would allow a narrative to harden against me. I decided that the wedding would be the only place left where the truth could not be whispered away. The plan for the execution was precise but not cruel. I invited a small number of neighbors, friends, and a few relatives to the rehearsal dinner under the guise of delivering a parting gift for the couple. I prepared packages that looked like modest favors. Inside each envelope were copies of bank statements, a printed timeline of transfers, receipts, and a short letter that read, "This is why. I changed my will. Please read." The idea was to make the proof visible, to let community eyes see paper that matched memory. Mark advised me on legal boundaries. Rachel agreed to be present to document reactions without sensationalism, and Tom helped me with logistics. I remember folding the last envelope at midnight, the lamp's amber light falling on the paper, the smell of ink and old glue. I felt nerves that tasted like pennies. The execution scene was a study in controlled exposure. I walked into the rehearsal dinner carrying a tray of envelopes like a man carrying an offering. The hall smelled of fried onions and perfume. The candles flickered, and the hum of polite conversation filled the room. I approached the table where Laura's family sat, where Daniel laughed with an ease that used to be reserved for me. "Good evening," I said, voice steady. I set an envelope before each person and left one at the head table. I heard Susan gasp when she recognized her neighbor's name on a receipt. I saw Tom glance up, eyes wide. Daniel reached for his envelope with a look that was a mixture of curiosity and dread. As people opened the papers, murmurs rose. "Is this true?" Emily asked aloud, fingers white on the paper. "Dad, what is this?" Daniel's voice had many edges. I read the letter I had placed inside, words I had rehearsed, a timeline, an accounting, an offer for mediation, and the explanation for the will's changes. I did not raise my voice. I let the paper speak. Conversations started in small clusters, questions, clarifications, denials. Laura accused me of theatrics. A cousin named Alejandro said, "This is embarrassing." Rachel, who had stayed in the corner, lifted her recorder and asked Daniel a factual question about the dates. He could not answer simply because the records were clear. The room shifted from assumption to evidence, and for the first time in months I felt the frayed edges of my dignity smoothing. The third moment of tension happened right after the envelope reveal. It was a narrow corridor between accusation and reconciliation, a place where someone could step forward with anger or with inquiry. Daniel stood, his face a map of hurt and recognition. He asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" I answered, "I did. I told you over and over in small ways, and you asked me to be invisible." He lunged toward the table, fingers scrabbling, looking for reasons to pin me back into a role that made him comfortable. Laura shouted his name. Alejandro tried to calm him, hands flat, voice low. Mark stepped up and asked for a moment to speak privately. I felt my heart beat loud in my throat, the room narrowing to a ring of faces. I remembered Maria's last words about truth, and waited as if the world had paused. After the scene, repercussions arrived. Some family members felt betrayed by my method. Others thanked me for finally making the ledger visible. The local paper ran a factual piece that evening, Rachel's balanced account, including quotes and the timeline we provided. The bank returned a detailed audit confirming the transfers I had described and noting inconsistencies with how some funds had been used. Laura confronted me privately, crying about fear of being judged. Daniel avoided my calls for 3 days. Alejandro texted that he was on my side but asked for time. Susan brought soup and told me, "I have always known you as someone who gives." Tom took the envelopes and made copies for his own safety. Legally, Mark filed the updated will with the required witnesses and a clause that allocated sentimental items differently, set up a trust for grandchildren contingent on mediation, and required notice and accounting for assets before distributions. The word justice found a shape in paperwork and in conversation. 1 month later, the first check in the timeline came back public. Newsletters in the neighborhood referenced the audit and asked for community meetings on transparency. My name appeared in a small profile about elders protecting their assets. People I had not spoken to in years dropped by with stories of how my small payments had made their lives easier. The house felt less like a vault and more like a place where stories could be told without being stolen. Daniel called once, a short message of static, and then, "We need to talk." We scheduled a small meeting with Mark as mediator. The first month was raw, corrective, and noisy. I filed for small claims to recover funds used without consent from an account that had been explicitly for household support. The process was slow but public. 3 months in, the community reaction shifted. An op-ed in the local paper questioned the cultural expectation that older family members must finance the transition of younger relatives indefinitely. Support groups formed, including a small neighborhood association led by Susan and supported by a local NGO that provided elder legal resources. Mark helped me set up a modest trust that ensured grandchildren would be supported, but only with transparent conditions. The relationship with Daniel remained strained, but phone calls started to be longer, less clipped. He admitted confusion about obligation and made a tentative offer to help reconcile finances by paying back a portion. We did not hug, we did not pretend things were as before, but there was a new honesty, a new ledger that included feelings and money. 6 months after the wedding, where I did not attend, change had settled into rhythm. The will had been executed in its new form, and a notice had been sent to relevant family members explaining the reasons and offering mediation. Daniel called and spoke for nearly an hour. He did not apologize properly. He said he was learning. Laura had left town for a temporary job, overwhelmed by public attention. The bank, having completed the audit, instituted an internal note to prevent misuse of accounts by proxies. A lawyer from a local elder rights organization reached out and offered to hold a seminar where I spoke about documentation and dignity. People listened, some with tears, some with skeptical raised brows. I found myself invited on a small local radio show to advise others on preserving assets and respect. My life did not revert to its old comfort. Instead, it rearranged around clearer boundaries. The money that had been at risk was now protected. The dignity I had been reclaiming rested less on ledgers and more on the fact that I had shown up with documents, not wrath. In the end, the story is not about revenge. I changed a will to reflect truth, not spite. Consequences were practical: a revised estate plan, a bank audit, minor reimbursements, and a public conversation that shifted local norms. Personal consequences were more delicate: strained family ties, a slower path to reconciliation, and a sense of relief that comes from naming what was done. I found allies in unlikely places. Rachel, the journalist who insisted on fairness.
Susan, the neighbor who brought lemon cake and steady hands. Mark, who navigated legal language with compassion. Tom, who provided muscle and memory. Alejandro, who eventually asked honest questions. Javier, who processed the audit, and Emily, who became a careful mediator in family chats. I forgave in small measures when it was deserved, and maintained distance where it was necessary. My message to anyone who watches is to keep records, to speak early, and to recognize that protecting your future can be an act of love. If this story touched you, subscribe for more real accounts of people who chose boundaries over silence. Share this video with someone who needs to see that dignity can be restored with papers, patience, and the courage to be visible. Remember, dignity is not for sale. It is reclaimed.